Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. I'm Catherine King with the International Museum of Women, and it is absolutely my pleasure to welcome you all here tonight to our program, Let Girls Lead, Empowering Girls Globally. I would like to start out by saying it is such a thrill for us to see all of you here tonight and to see so many teens, youth, young women, as well as educators. And I want to give you a special welcome. I also want to welcome everyone who I know are here because you care so much about girls' leadership and really care about the issues that have brought us together. There's a lot of passion in the room, and I'm very excited to hear from our panelists, as I know you are. Before I welcome our speakers, I'd like to say a few words about the International Museum of Women, particularly for those who may be new to us. IMOW is an innovative museum. We are a virtual museum. You can visit us at www.imow.org. Our mission is to inspire creativity, awareness, and action on vital global issues for women around the world. And the way we do that is by exhibiting art, multimedia, ideas, and visions for the future. In doing so, we act as a creative catalyst for social change and propel action on women's rights globally. Over the last year, 750,000 visitors from around the world, from over 200 countries and territories, visited our online exhibitions and visited our pop-up events, global events that took place in concert with our network of NGO partners and artists on the ground. The museum is really passionate about using our online platform to tell the untold stories of women and girls. And on the screens around you tonight, you may have seen some of the powerful images of mothers, daughters, and grandmothers that came from last year's project on global motherhood. You also see some really powerful imagery, art, and photography from Muslim women that are featured in our current exhibition, Muslima, Muslim Women's Art and Voices. And I'm really excited to share with all of you tonight that our next project, the one that's in development, launching in fall of 2014, is called Ignite, Women Fueling Science and Technology. And in this project, we're going to specifically be focusing on the importance of empowering girls and women in science, technology, engineering, and math careers, the STEM fields. So I mentioned that because I know there are probably a lot of people in the room tonight who are working on those issues, and I would love to talk to you. Across all of our programs and across all of the topics that we cover, we believe that when you create a space for the world's women to tell their stories, people are inspired, opinions shift, and you catalyze the potential for lasting change. Tonight's theme about empowering girls and their allies to lead social change is a great fit for IMOW. We knew and know that the conversation will be an opportunity tonight to witness the power of storytelling and to witness the power of leadership and action. So before I introduce our panelists, I have some important thanks to make. I want to thank the amazing volunteers, staff, and board of directors of the International Museum of Women. I want to thank Charles Schwab and the incredible team here at the Schwab Center for hosting us and for supporting this event, and specifically want to thank Carrie Schwab and our board member, Nisha Hathi, for hosting us. I'd like to recognize, I would also like to recognize our community partners who helped us get out the word about tonight's program, the Global Fund for Women, ITVS, Public Health Institute, the Women's Funding Network, and Women Deliver. And a very, very special thanks to Wells Fargo, our funders of the Speaker Series program. It's thanks to their generosity and support that we're able to bring this program to you tonight. I'm delighted to announce that tonight's program is being taped. And with that, I would encourage all of you to take out your cell phones and make sure they're silenced. This would also be a good time to mention that we are going to be live tweeting from tonight's event, #LetGirlsLead. So you can actually send your questions into our panelists via #LetGirlsLead. We also have question cards on your seats, and our volunteers with question cards are posted here or standing in the back of the room. They'll come around and collect your questions. So whether you tweet them to us or write them out, we'd love to get your thoughts up to our panelists. And now it is truly my pleasure to introduce to you our incredible panelists and to share some of their background by way of introduction. I'll start by welcoming Sarah Hobson, who is on my far left, your far right. Sarah Hobson joined Newfield Foundation in 2003 as its first executive director. Newfield supports rural women's organizations to advance their rights, knowledge, and resources. Sarah brings to the organization her long experience of working with community-based initiatives in West Africa, South Asia, and Iran. Prior to joining Newfield, Sarah was executive director of International Development Exchange, IDEX, partnering with community organizations in Asia, Africa, and Latin America on grassroots economic development. She was a consultant over many years to the UN agency International Fund for Agricultural Development, IFAD, and is founder and trustee of Open Channels, a British NGO working with indigenous peoples in Africa to define their lands, resources, and rights. Sarah is the author and contributor and editor of 8 books and has produced and presented many documentaries for television. Welcome, Sarah. And sitting next to Sarah is Dr. Denise Raquel Dunning. Denise is the visionary founder of Let Girls Lead, a global campaign that amplifies the power of girls to create their own solutions, tell their own stories, and lead social change around the world. She is also the executive director of the Adolescent Girls Advocacy and Leadership Institute, AGALI, an international movement improving girls' lives through girl-centered advocacy. AGALI's impacts include the passage of national laws and implementation of programs that protect girls from violence, increase their access to education, health services, and economic opportunities, and empower young women to develop their own solutions to the obstacles they face. Denise is also the executive producer of Poder, a documentary highlighting the power of investing in girls. Based at the Public Health Institute, Denise teaches at the University of California's San Francisco Global Health Master's Program and is a thought leader in the field of global health and development. She has a doctorate degree from the University of California, Berkeley, a master's degree in public affairs from Princeton University's Woodrow Wilson School, and graduated summa cum laude from Duke University. Previously, Denise worked at the David and Lucille Packard Foundation and served as a Fulbright Scholar in Honduras, working with the United Nations Development Program. So please join me in welcoming Denise. And sitting next to Denise is Riya Singh. Riya is co-chair of the Teen Advisory Board for Girl Up. Since August 2012, Riya has served as a teen advisor to Girl Up, which is an innovative campaign of the United Nations Foundation that gives American girls the opportunity to become global leaders and channel their energy and compassion to raise awareness and funds for UN programs that help some of the world's hardest to reach adolescent girls. Girl Up envisions a world where all girls, no matter where they live, have the opportunity to become educated, healthy, safe, counted, and positioned to be the next generation of leaders. Riya is a senior at Hillsdale High School in San Mateo, California. She is a self-proclaimed jazz nerd. She plays the baritone sax and the classical tuba and participates on her school's mock trial team as a co-captain and trial attorney. And throughout her work with Girl Up, Riya works to mobilize her school and community, and most importantly, she works to advocate for the rights of girls everywhere. She started a Girl Up club at her school and is working with other schools in the Bay Area to start a new regional coalition of Girl Up clubs. So I think that there's a conversation that might be happening tonight. Welcome, Riya. And moderating the panel tonight will be IMOW's very own Executive Director, Clare Winterton. So I'm so happy to once again welcome all of our panelists and Clare, and enjoy the evening.
Thank you, Catherine. I think you'll all agree from those incredible bios that you heard in the introduction, we couldn't have a better group of women to be leading us through this conversation this evening. So I want to just jump right in and ask each of you in turn the big question, which is, why is it so important to invest in girls? And maybe Denise, I'll start with you.
Sure. Lots of reasons why. So, global research shows that, by investing in girls, girls can not only transform their own lives, but also their families, their communities, and the world. And we know that girls, unfortunately, in today's world, are often the most marginalized and the most vulnerable in their communities. So, there are 600 million adolescent girls around the world, many of whom, 25% live in extreme poverty. There are incredible statistics in terms of what it means for a girl to be able to go to school. So, for example, a girl who goes to school for 7 years, so that's in the US, that would be basic elementary school, will actually get married 4 years later and have 2.2 fewer children than her next door neighbor who doesn't have the chance to go to school. So, girls' education and investing in girls not only transforms that girl's life, but the lives of other people in her community and in her country as well.
Sarah, do you want to jump in?
No, I'd actually love to hear.
Riya, you're on the spot.
I would love to answer. So, yeah, I definitely think for the most obvious reason, girls are important because we have a different perspective and something that's so unique about us. We're empathetic, passionate beings who are often left out of the conversation and in so many different fields of study. And I think that is the most important reason why we deserve a right. We have a right to be a part of that conversation and equal in all fields.
Good, thank you. So I wanted really to add a couple of things. For me, it's a question of justice, because I think young women, girls face so many injustices and there's so much discrimination. And I do think the energy and stamina and passion of young women and girls is incredibly important. And so for me, the potential of young girls and adolescent girls is incredibly important and something to respond to and work with and be inspired by is important. And I think one other important factor is that I think there's increasing recognition of the need to support and work with adolescent girls. And so there are more resources, so I think there are more opportunities, more doors opening, which is important.
And I think just building on that, another piece that's really crucial is that even though there's incredible research on the investment, the return on investment for supporting programs for girls, we actually know that 2 cents out of every dollar in international aid funding goes to programs that focus on girls. So even though by investing in girls, we have seen the incredible transformations that girls can create, there's very little resources that are going into girls specifically. And so there's so much incredible potential, like Sarah mentioned, that's really just being lost. And so really, that's why we're interested in having this conversation and getting folks more engaged.
So Denise, I think in a way you bridged into my next question, which was going to be, I mean, clearly there is so much rich potential that you all spoke so very passionately to. But what are the barriers to girls achieving their potential, particularly if you look at what are the barriers that girls are facing versus boys? What are the inequities that you're seeing in the work that all of you do?
Sarah, you want to start?
Sure, yes, I'm happy to. I actually did a very long list because I had advance notice of this question. So I think the sort of big overall challenge that girls and women generally face is prejudice and discrimination, which then affects all sorts of policies and attitudes and belief systems and makes it very difficult for girls to participate on a level playing field. And I think that then shows up in lack of resources, lack of access to resources, less access to education. I think another really important factor for girls around the world is the very heavy labor that they are required to do, whether it's in the household or whether it's in the fields. It's like hours and hours and hours of a young girl's life is, for many girls, spent on labor because it's exploitation of girls. And I would also say girls are particularly vulnerable to being sexually exploited. So they're really, and to some extent this depends on the part of the world or the place as to what the challenges are. But I think one of the things that I've been very struck by in my I've had this incredible privilege to be able to work in different parts of the world. And I think the thing that has struck me in all of the work that I've done is how similar the realities are for girls and women in many, many parts of the world in terms of discrimination and prejudice and huge challenges.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things. So, just a few more quick stats. For example, 70% of out-of-school youth in the world are girls, right? So if it were equal, that would be 50-50. Similarly, in Africa, of all the young people who are HIV positive, 3/4 are girls. So that just shows you the ways in which girls are more vulnerable to HIV infection, both for biological reasons, but also much more for social reasons. So, for example, in Guatemala where we work, it's amazing, but if a doula, like a partera, like a nurse midwife, delivers a baby, she actually charges double when the baby's a boy than when the baby's a girl, right? So that just gives you a sense in a very concrete economic way the ways in which girls are undervalued in the communities that we work in and in communities all around the world.
Another thing, I think there's a lot of denial and a lack of awareness for the issues that girls face, even in America. A lot of people don't realize that girls like me, girls my age, do suffer from sexual exploitation and some of the kind of messier issues that I think we're going to get to later. And convincing boys our age that this is something that does happen to us and finding kind of an appropriate way to convey that and get them to our side and have that support is a very difficult challenge that I think I've faced in my work too.
Absolutely. So all of you work in different ways in this space of empowering girls globally. What are the models that work? You've articulated some of the big barriers and challenges that girls in different communities are facing, but maybe you could each speak to what is the work that your organization is doing, or what are the models that you have seen that really are making a concrete difference?
You want to start?
Yeah. So you guys heard a little bit about Girl Up, but one thing that Girl Up, the United Nations Foundation campaign, is so effective because it empowers American girls to realize that girls in developing countries need their support and need support from people everywhere. So I think that's very effective, getting people who have that direct connection, girls helping girls, because we have that special bond. We're all girls. We all experience some very similar things, even though girls in America may not experience some of the obstacles that girls in developing nations face. We do have some of the same problems. We have body image issues. Some of us do have sexual exploitation issues. There are some of the same parallels that we do face. So,
great.
Denise?
Yeah, so our work with Let Girls Lead, we started about 5 years ago, and essentially the model is basically a tipping point model. So working in specific countries in Africa and Latin America and finding people who are doing amazing work with girls and young women, usually on a small scale, and giving them a little bit in the way of extra resources, capacity building, and funding to be able to take that work to scale. So it's essentially, a social entrepreneurship model. And I find often the best way to talk about what the work is by talking about, who the work is. So, for example, one of our partners in Liberia is a woman named Rosanna Shack, who, came into our program in 2010. And just as sort of a little bit of context for you, Liberia suffered through a 14-year civil war. And as a result of that and the ongoing culture of violence within Liberia, literally 75% of girls and women have experienced either direct violence or sexual assault. So there's this tremendous challenge facing girls and women just in terms of very, very basic safety and security. I mean, we're not even talking getting to go to college or getting to go to school. It's just, do you have a safe place to live and a safe place to sleep at night? And so anyhow, Rosanna came into our program and was the director of an organization called Think. And essentially what she had was a safe home for girls, where girls could live free from violence and exploitation, could go to school, and could develop some basic skills so that when they became adults, they would be independent and self-sufficient. And, she was doing amazing work and incredibly visionary, reaching about 25 girls a year in Monrovia, in the capital. And she came into our program, and we were doing this intensive work on advocacy and scale and how you get structural change and how you get governments and companies and decision makers to really focus and prioritize on the needs of women and girls. And I remember sitting in this one session with her and this, basically a light bulb going off, where she said, you know, there's no law that protects Liberian girls from violence. There's no law that protects them from exploitation. And so she launched this incredible advocacy campaign to get a national children's law passed that guarantees girls comprehensive access to education, access to healthcare services so they can see a doctor when they need one. It outlaws child marriage, which is very common there. It outlaws harmful traditional practices like female genital mutilation and others. So it's one of the most progressive laws in Africa. And you know, she did that with $10,000 grant from us. So going from reaching 25 girls a year to reaching literally 600,000 adolescent girls in Liberia. Mm-hmm. And then really focusing from there on making sure that that law is implemented, and so it's actually changing girls' lives on the ground and empowering girls to speak up for their own rights and raise their own voices, to be their own advocates, and make sure that the government is fulfilling those commitments. So that's really kind of the model of what we've done, and what we see as being really critical is, you know, finding those local leaders, investing in their vision and in their expertise, and coming in with support, but not a top-down approach that says, you know, if it's Liberia, it's got to be violence, and if it's Guatemala, it has to be education, but really supporting those local initiatives to create grassroots and national change.
Thank you. Sarah, anything to add on models that work?
I think from Newfield's point of view, it's really supporting collective action and movement building, not just the individual. And I think that something that we really try to do is to get resources directly into the hands of women's and girls groups that they have control over. So they have decision-making authority. They can basically realize their vision and their solutions. And we found that supporting where vision and energy lies has been incredibly dynamic. And there's this sense of ownership and leadership and agency, which means that many of these groups, as Denise was saying, it's like there's this incredible movement out because it inspires others to do the same. And so we see really significant change happening in terms of more girls going to school, more income in the household, greater health, and particularly greater leadership. So young women running for election in local rural district councils. I mean, quite significant changes in the power structure.
Mm-hmm. So what I'd like to do now is try and actually bring that to life through storytelling. We have the fantastic opportunity this evening to preview some film work that's been done for Let Girls Lead, in which Denise has been leading, in conjunction with the filmmaker Lisa Russell. It's a film called Poder that traces the story of two girls in Guatemala. And I think we'll start by taking a look at the trailer for that film, and then we'll jump into a little bit more conversation about exactly what those girls were able to accomplish in their community.
Y supuestamente a estudiar, ¿va? No entiendo, no.
Just a brief taster, and we're going to see a little bit more of the girls in action in a moment. But before we see that, I was wondering, Denise, if you can just briefly paint a picture for us of what is the situation that girls are facing in Guatemala, and particularly in the community that's featured in this film.
Yeah, absolutely. So in Guatemala, in the region where we shot the film, the challenges facing girls are enormous. So, just to give you, again, some quick stats, less than 10% of indigenous Mayan girls finish elementary school. So basic primary education, less than 10%. More than half have their first baby before they turn 18. And maternal mortality is actually one of the highest rates in the Western Hemisphere. So girls there are more likely to die in childbirth before age 19 than from anything else. So challenges are enormous, and that's all in part due to what Sarah alluded to earlier, very conservative norms and sort of persistent discrimination against girls. So, for example, Elba and Emmeline, who you see there, Elba is the oldest of 6 siblings. And, at age 16, it's her responsibility with her mom to take care of all of her younger siblings, in addition to trying to put herself through school, finish school, and get an education and be able to have a job. And the reality is that, Elba and other girls like her, what's most common is that they get married by the time they're 14 or 15. They have their first baby by the time they're 16 or 17. Assuming that they survive childbirth, they go on to have 5 or 6 children, and their children repeat the exact same cycle. So most girls in this community, their lives look pretty much like the lives of their mothers and their grandmothers and their great-grandmothers. And there's this intergenerational cycle of poverty and oppression of girls and women. So, that's sort of the context. It's in this rural community, about a 6-hour, incredibly bumpy, uncomfortable bus ride from Guatemala City, in a place that, has enormous challenges. And actually, when we shot the film, that wasn't what we wanted to focus on. So we didn't want to focus on the problems facing girls, and we didn't want to focus on the challenges and the obstacles and the ways in which girls are victims and vulnerable and exploited. And even though those things are true, the story that we wanted to tell with this film is that girls in Guatemala, just like here and around the world, are amazing leaders. And they're incredible agents for change. And so by investing in Elba and Emmeline and so many other girls in the community, they were able to transform their own lives. So they transformed their own lives, their families, their community, and actually the political structure of their town and their country in Guatemala.
Okay, so I think that's a great framing for the clip. We're going to see Elba and Emmeline in action, forging some social change with the mayor of their community.
By the end of the program, we felt confident that we could approach the mayor again and get his support. We had so much more confidence. We had a hook. When the mayor opened the door this time, we explained to him that we wanted to talk about making the community safer for girls, like his daughter. This time, the mayor opened the door to welcome us in. In the few minutes we had with him, we shared our community notes and we talked about the ongoing threats to girls' health, education, and future. We asked for his help.
Muchas veces los padres no le dan importancia a los jóvenes, más que todo no les importa lo que ellos hagan, y a veces los mandan a trabajar porque los padres son alcohólicos, y muchas veces los jóvenes señoritas tienen que trabajar para mantener a su familia.
Bueno, escuchando la petición de ustedes, eso vamos a analizar detenidamente si es factible, y si no, pues lo sentimos mucho.
The mayor told us for change to happen, there would need to be well-documented research. He asked if we were willing to help him, and we gladly said yes. For the next several months, we worked with other young leaders, traveling the region to collect information to convince the mayor to support us. Finally, one day he invited us to his office saying he had some good news.
Hola, buenas tardes. Pasen adelante, mucho gusto, bienvenida. Pase adelante, bienvenida. ¿Cómo están?
Muy bien.
Qué bueno, qué bueno. Me alegra, es un placer de tenerlo nuevamente aquí. Pues pase adelante, tome asiento, pase adelante, tome asiento. Yo pienso que durante este trabajo que hemos hecho, al inicio para nosotros creíamos que no era parte del desarrollo, pero creemos con este trabajo que ustedes han venido haciendo, es muy importante. Entonces nosotros sí estamos tan de acuerdo y muy de acuerdo, y vamos a ahí sí que hacer lo mejor para sacar adelante todo el plan que ustedes tienen como jóvenes.
As the mayor signed and gave the official stamp on the new policies and funding report, Elba and I couldn't help but be very excited.
Felicidades, felicidades, este documento es para ustedes.
I should say, Denise, that represents the culmination of a lot of hard work and a lot of resilience, and the door being physically shut in their face by the mayor at least 2 times before they even got that initial conversation moving. So, I mean, really incredible resilience and real work in breaking the cycle that you were describing. So can you share for all of us, kind of, we don't have time to show the full movie here, although we're going to be thrilled to share it with all of you when it's ready and the final cut is released. What were the concrete results that were taken into effect by the work that was endorsed by the mayor in that clip that we saw?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess just as a little bit of context for that, when we started this work in 2009 in Guatemala, a woman came into our program named Juani, and she decided that given the context of where she was from and her community, she didn't want to advocate for girls, but she wanted to advocate with girls. So she started this amazing leadership empowerment program for these indigenous Mayan girls from the Mayamam community. So these girls between the ages of 9 and 15. And Elba and Emmeline, who you see here, along with several other girls, took part and learned about, what are their basic rights, things that you've raised in terms of what role can they have as leaders, what opportunities can they create for other young women and girls. So they launched this campaign, and in terms of the outcomes, I think there are several different levels. The first was really this incredible community mobilization, where they got together religious leaders, indigenous leaders, parents, teachers, to really have a dialogue on the importance of investing in girls, and the fact that things could be different in their community, and that the ongoing poverty and the ongoing discrimination did not have to be the norm. And so starting that way, and then going to the mayor and asking the mayor to support them, and you don't see this here, but literally, apparently in the first meeting that they had with the mayor, Elba, who you saw, stood up to speak, and the mayor actually laughed out loud and said, I've never had a group of girls walk into my office and talk to me about budgets and talk to me about policies. And essentially, who do you think you are? And why don't you go home and either play with your dolls or clean up after your younger siblings? And so obviously the girls were devastated. But like you said, they kept the push. And so they continued to work with Juani, who is participating in our program, and launched an incredible media advocacy campaign. So I think that second level of outcomes comes there, where they were able to go on local TV, on local radio. They were in the print media, really pushing a new framing and understanding of the importance of girls, and changing people's norms and values around the importance of girls, and seeing that girls actually can create change. And then over the long term, winning the mayor over, what he ended up doing, he signed public policies that he co-wrote with the girls, focused on girls' health and education. So ensuring that girls have the support to be able to finish their education, have support to be able to go and get health services and treatment in the clinic, have access to reproductive health services so that they can avoid unwanted pregnancies, and creating a municipal office of youth and children, so that there's a lot of focus on violence prevention, both for girls and for boys. And most importantly in my mind, not most, but very importantly in my mind, is actually providing funding out of his own municipal budget. So there's now a line item in the municipal budget guaranteeing support and funds for those programs over the long term. So it's not, if he goes out of office, somebody new comes in, that line item is there, and that money is there to be able to support girls' health and education. So I think those are some of the critical outcomes that we've seen, as well as really starting to be a model within Guatemala in terms of girls' leadership and empowerment as agents for change, advocating both at the local and the national level.
Thank you. I think that's a great example that really brings this work to life for all of us. And I wanted to bring Riya and Sarah back in to talk about one of the strands within the film. And you described it in terms of the mayor and his hostility and his prejudice, but it also comes up in the attitudes of the boys that Elma and Emmeline are dealing with. But the issue of how do you bring boys and men along with you? What are the challenges to overcoming those prejudices and those preconceptions? And is there, I guess as part of that question, is there a risk that boys can become alienated when suddenly there's a spotlight on girls that didn't exist before, and how do you navigate that?
I would love to jump in.
Yeah.
So I've actually experienced this at my school. As I started to, last year when I started to start a club at my school called Girl Up, and it focused on girls' rights and other such things, trying to get boys to support us in fundraisers and even trying to get boys to become a part of our club. So we were successful in some cases. I do have some guy friends who are part of the club. So in that way, we have been successful in not alienating boys. But on the other side, we have received a lot of backlash from boys who joked about starting boy up clubs and anti-girl up clubs because they think, it's unfortunate, but something, I think it goes back to the awareness and education about girls' rights. A lot of men specifically just feel like, since now that we're in the spotlight, that, wait, where are we supposed to go? What are we supposed to do? So I've definitely seen a lot of that. And
has there been anything that you've been able to try that has helped mitigate some of that? What have been tactics that have worked?
I think just understanding that, like, they do have these opinions, and we can't disregard the fact that boys aren't going to necessarily love the idea of us taking over the leadership roles, and welcoming their opinions and trying to negotiate in a meaningful way that's really going to speak to them. Because we can say, okay, whatever, boys, like, whatever. Yeah, you don't know what you're talking about. But it's not as effective as really speaking to them and trying to see what we can do to work together, because they are the other half of the population that we need to work with and we should work with to really make change.
Sarah?
It's really interesting hearing you speak about this, because I think it's really difficult and it's incredibly challenging. And I think that when girls do get in their stride, I mean, it's very easy to become very powerful and strong and excited, and it can be threatening. And it can be threatening on a very personal level, I think, among friends or in school, and it can also be threatening on a larger scale, because it's like, women have been, or girls have, been in this more subservient role, and suddenly here they are becoming more independent. And it's something that in our work in supporting girls' movements in Africa, particularly in West Africa, we've watched and followed very carefully the choices that they've made to both improve their circumstances but also to navigate the path. And I think that we feel that it's incredibly important for us to hear and understand and listen and follow, because they're making constantly, as I do in my own life, for example, in my own relationships, or many of us do, we're navigating the path. It's like, is this going to bring trouble? Is this going to prompt violence? Or how do we engage people? If somebody's really, absolutely doesn't want to support us, how do we deal with that? It's very complicated, and so I think to have the space to make those decisions ourselves and to work collaboratively with others is incredibly
Sarah,
important.
Any concrete lessons from the field of things that have worked in engaging boys and men when there was perhaps initial hostility?
I think, well, we provide a lot of support at community level, and I think that one of the things that's been really important is supporting girls and women to understand what their rights are, but also to then educate men and boys about rights in general. Yeah. And their rights is incredibly important. And then I think also when providing resources, it's like, making it clear that those resources aren't to exclude boys or men. They're actually to benefit the family and the community. And actually, we've seen this huge shift among many men and elders and community leaders who have begun to really appreciate the creativity and the initiatives that women are taking as they have more leadership, as they have more resources, as children go to school more. It's like actually they become more valued. And but it takes time. It takes several years, but it's possible. And we've been very careful about really looking at, is this prompting a backlash or is this prompting violence? And there was one group of young men who were, quite agitated that they hadn't received community grants, but they were very vociferous about it. But ultimately, in the end, became engaged in the whole project and sort of backed off.
Okay. Well, it's heartening to hear that there are possibilities for positive progress there.
Yes, absolutely,
yeah. Okay.
Definitely.
Okay, so I want to change tack just a little bit at this point and ask about the current popularity and excitement about investing in girls versus investing in women. And I ask that question from the perspective of some critiques that have been made. For example, there was a very eloquent article by Kavita Ramdas, formerly of the Global Fund for Women, in the Stanford Social Innovation Review, where she essentially said the focus on investing in girls and the impetus behind that perhaps is coming from there being a fear in the mainstream or amongst men or amongst corporations, read it however you will, of investing in the messy issues that come along with investing in women, namely issues around sexuality and reproductive health. And perhaps it's safer to focus on girls because, you have this kind of innocent pigtailed image of a girl that doesn't take you into that kind of messy territory. And when we have this conversation about the importance of investing in girls, does any of that critique resonate with you? Do you feel that that's merited? Do you see that happening? Or how would you counter those concerns? I don't know who would like to begin or jump in.
Sorry, just really quickly, I would just like to say that I read that article and I was very interested by it, but knowing what I know about girls' rights, I was a little bit confused by it because I kind of, from what I understand, girls do have reproductive health problems and girls do have these issues.
Absolutely.
I mean, women do too, but I think the messier topic is the fact that little girls go through this. Girls, so I think that is the messier issue that we're trying to tackle, and
Well said.
Go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, exactly. In Malawi where we work, nobody bats an eye when a 9-year-old girl is married to a 40-year-old man. So what does that mean for her sexual and reproductive health? It means that she's raped when she's 9. She could be pregnant at 10. She could have obstetric fistula and die in childbirth by 11. So I think to say that, it's not messy to deal with girls, while I have tremendous respect for Kavita, certainly, I disagree with that.
I think it's, I guess there are a couple of things for me. One is I think if girls don't have access to education, I guess we see in our work what the consequences are of that in older women who aren't literate. It really is a huge impediment. And so for me it's logical and reasonable to want girls to go to school and to become educated. It's very, very important. And I think that, okay, maybe one could say too much of the funding, but the truth is any funding for girls is incredibly important. And there are these fashions in the philanthropic world. It's like, okay, we're going to fund education this year or we're going to fund something else next year. And I don't find it, I think it's important to just sort of welcome all funding and try and influence it to some extent, but I don't find it very productive to criticize it. And I think if you look, for example, here in the Bay Area, in Silicon Valley, if you're looking at what many of the funders are funding within the Bay Area, it's predominantly education, schools. That's something that's very close to people's hearts. So I would say, You know, let's have funding for girls' education, and let's have funding for adult women, adult literacy. Let's have funding for, you know, integrated work that women and girls themselves are leading.
Mm-hmm. Thank you all very much. I want to remind the audience that we're about to transition into audience questions. If you have a question, you can either tweet it with the hashtag #LetGirlsLead, or you can write it on the question card that is on your chair. And if you wave it, we have ushers who are walking around the room who will collect your questions. So anything that you want to ask our panel, please join the conversation. And while that is happening, I wanted to turn the spotlight back onto the United States and onto, to an extent, some of the girls and girls groups who are in the room. And perhaps, Riya, to ask you particularly, for young women who are sitting here tonight who are thinking, perhaps, what can I do to accelerate social change within my own community? How can I step into a more of a leadership role and encourage other girls around me to do that? Or who are thinking, how can I step into that kind of a leadership role and have some kind of a connection with or impact on some of the global issues for girls that we've been talking about this evening? What would you suggest and recommend?
So the first thing that I would definitely suggest is recognizing that you can empower yourself. And empowerment's kind of the first thing. Empowerment's the first thing, for sure. I got lucky last year when doing a social justice project at school to find one of the best mentors that I've ever had. Some of you may know her, Dr. Musumbi Kanyaro. She's a wonderful woman who actually guided me through the process and nominated me to be a Girl Up teen advisor. So finding someone, whether it's a teacher or a community leader, to guide you through that process is important, but also recognizing that you can do it yourself. So one thing that I'm a pretty big advocate for is Girl Up. So if you go to girlup.org, it's really easy to start a club at your school, and that's, I think, as of now, one of the easiest ways to connect with girls in developing countries and directly make change in those countries. Another way is through Let Girls Lead. It's an amazing organization, and it's a great platform to empower yourself and share your story with other people. Because we all have a story, whether or not we're speaking at the UN or here at the Charles Schwab Center speaking in front of our school. We all have leadership capacities that are important to share with others.
Yeah. Can I just
add
to that?
Yeah.
So, Riya, thank you for mentioning. You know, one of the things that we've done with Let Girls Lead when we were in Guatemala shooting the film, we thought a lot about how we could empower and help girls to tell their own stories. And so we launched the Global Girls Conversation, which is a video contest and platform where girls around the world can tell their own inspiring stories of social change. So everything from how they convinced their dad to let them go to school, to convincing Ellen Johnson Sirleaf to pass the National Children's Law in Liberia. And these are, 1 to 2 minute videos really capturing girls' power. And those are now live on our site. So we launched in September and have gotten about, I think, 40 videos at this point from girls all around the world sharing their incredible solutions, their strategies, and raising their voices. And I would love to encourage all of the girls in this room to grab your phone, grab your friend's phone, grab a camera, and tell your story and send it in to us. You can go to letgirlslead.org. The video contest runs through the end of December, and you have a chance at winning $10,000 to be able to create your own short film. So we're providing both cash and equipment and training to the strongest and the most inspiring of these girls' stories so that these girls can create their own film. So that when our film comes out for International Women's Day that you saw, we'll also announce the winners of the film contest. So please check it out, letgirlslead.org, and please submit your videos if you're interested.
So I have a follow-up audience question for Riya about inspiring younger women and men in the United States to care, underlined, about gender equity and girls' issues. And I think the subtext to that question is perhaps a perception, at least, that not enough younger women and men really are committed to feminist issues or gender equality issues. Do you think that's true? And can you speak to speak to what is happening about inspiring a younger generation on that theme?
I think definitely with my generation especially, there's a stigma behind the word feminist for some strange reason. Again, going back to my school and the club that I started, some people joke around, oh, isn't that the feminist club? And I respond by saying, no, it's the Girl Up Club, but yeah, we're all feminists, of course. Aren't you a feminist? Isn't everyone a feminist? And I think the stigma behind that word and just kind of the idea of empowering girls, as we know in the 70s, it was such a huge movement. And as my generation, I think, looks back on that, we see something that some people see as negative for, I don't know why, but I think it was great. But there is that stigma that is kind of becoming an obstacle for people like me and you guys when we try to go after our passion and share that passion with others. And I think definitely, once again, getting the guys on our side and talking to those guys. I think one thing that has definitely been beneficial with having boys in my Girl Up Club is they can speak to other boys and explain it in a language that other guys will understand. So getting those good guys on your side is definitely a good thing. Definitely.
Fantastic. Either of you, anything to add on kind of feminism and the barrier that poses in engaging a younger generation?
That small question. Big deal, really.
I think it's interesting because I think there's also among many of the girls in West Africa that we work with, there is this anxiety about feminism. It's like, is it too confrontational or is it too rigid? But I think for me what's really important is finding allies and working together. And yes, there's a gender issue, but it's also even among women, because women can be limiting for girls. They can be hierarchical. And I think the critical issue is who are our allies and who do we work with together for change to happen that benefits girls.
Okay. Another audience question, which is, with all the conversation about global issues for girls, has perhaps the conversation about issues for girls in the United States got lost? What are the parallels that you see between the issues that face the girls that you all work with and issues for girls in the United States? And what would you recommend as ways that kind of attention and a spotlight on the issues that girls face in this country could be accelerated?
Sure. So, as I said before, American girls and girls in developing countries kind of go through some of the same problems that are a little bit less recognized. And I think, going back to your question, sorry, can you repeat the question? I'm kind of...
So the question was, has the level of focus on the United States and girls in the United States been lost? Are we kind of assuming that the United States and the situation for girls is fine, when maybe that's not the case?
Yeah, I think in some cases it has been a little bit lost, but going back to Girl Up, I think empowering American girls who have the capacity to make a difference in other countries is going to be so important in our future and right now. And teaching girls here that they do have the power to make change in other countries. I think it is getting lost a little bit, but there are these platforms, Let Girls Lead, Girl Up, and so many different organizations that you guys probably know a lot about that can help American girls while helping girls in developing countries. So kind of empowering two birds with one stone.
Denise, what analogies do you see between the issues that you're dealing with and what you see here?
Yeah, I think, there are a lot of parallels. I think some of the issues are different. For example, fortunately, child marriage is not legal in the U.S. All the norms, I think, in some communities in the U.S. for girls, though, are incredibly challenging. The realities for girls here in the Bay Area, here in the United States, especially from low-income communities, are not really all that different from a lot of the countries that we're working in. And, for example, we're working a lot in Guatemala, Honduras, and Mexico, all of which countries have large populations here in the Bay Area and in the U.S. And when I'm always amazed by how similar the challenges are and how similar the obstacles are to girls being able to finish school, to the likelihood of girls becoming pregnant and dropping out of school and not going back. And so, yeah, I guess long story short, the challenges may be more extreme and somewhat different, but they're not really all that different at all, in my mind.
I'd like to add to that, because I think for me, taking it from really, I guess I'm uncomfortable with this sort of US rest of the world divide. And I think that often it's like, you know, we solve other people's problems, and I'm not American, as you can hear, but it's European as well. And I don't actually feel that's particularly helpful. I think it's like we, you know, here in the US, girls face huge problems in terms of, we've talked about a number, but I think about diabetes and all sorts of health issues, and I would say our world is becoming increasingly unhealthy in many, many different ways, and there are massive problems going to be facing all of us through climate change and global warming, and we're all incredibly interconnected. So our industrial food system is affecting everyone all over the world, and actually I think that a lot of what people in other parts of the world can give us needs to be recognized rather than just us thinking that we can solve the problem. So I actually feel incredibly strongly about this, because I think that, you know, holding hands together to creatively address the problems and recognizing, working together, being girls together, being females together. I'm obviously an older woman. I have teenage grandchildren. I lived through my teenage years at a time that was incredibly dynamic and very difficult, and many of the struggles still exist. And so working together and not having that divide between us and them is incredibly important.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I see that a lot in our work in terms of, for example, you know, in the US there's a big battle for comprehensive sex ed. So should kids in school be able to learn about sexuality education? And what we see with our partners in Honduras in particular is their advocacy in terms of sex ed and making sure that young people have access to information and services is so progressive and so far beyond where we are in the US in terms of these issues. And, you know, similarly, the children's law in Liberia, a large part of the reason why that was passed was because of the advocacy of the Liberian Children's Parliament. Right? So it's an actual parliament of elected children, boys and girls, who can influence the national debate and the national policy framework. So, you know, we don't have anything like that here. You know, I think that there are incredible lessons to be learned from countries all around the world, both in terms of solutions that girls themselves are creating, as well as strategies that are very effective to improve girls' lives, you know, outside of the US and inside the US.
So staying on that aspirational plane of dreaming big and possibilities for the future, we have a question that came in via Twitter, which is, what would the world be like if we had significantly more female leaders? How would the world be different? Who would like to take a stab at that one?
Well, having lived under Maggie Thatcher, who took us to war, it doesn't necessarily mean that women in leadership make the world a better place. But I think a lot of studies have shown that actually if women do have more leadership, then there tends to be more peace in the world and in communities. Women tend to spend more of their money on family and health and education. So I think it would certainly be more equitable because women would be participating in decisions. And I think there would be much more dialogue and discussion, because I think women do feel incredibly passionately about certain issues and want to get around the table to talk about them and influence those decisions and policies. So there'd be big differences.
I'll move on. If anyone has any great thoughts to return to, I'll come back to them at the end. So I've had a few questions from the audience, just interested in how do you navigate in the work that you all do traditions and customs that are maybe very kind of closely held, maybe very culturally significant in particular communities, and how do you affect change and move forward with some of those cultural practices? And I think particularly some questions about FGM in that context. So Denise, maybe you could start.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the way that we navigate it is honestly that we don't navigate it, right? I mean, what we do is we identify strong local leaders, strong local organizations, give them a bit in the extra way of resources and support to be able to create the changes that they see are the most feasible, the most impactful, and the most likely to actually have effect. So, like I could never go to Liberia and say, FGM is wrong and you guys should pass a law that says that that's no longer going to be legal. That would never work in a million years, nor would I ever want to try. But, by identifying Rosie and Aisha, who know their context, know their reality, know how far they can push in a way that does push the envelope but doesn't endanger themselves or the girls that they're working in, they've been able to get a law passed that eliminates FGM. And that navigates those harmful traditional practices. And another example of our work in Malawi, we're partnering with an amazing local organization run by a woman named Faith, who she was really focused on this issue of child marriage and concerned about it. And what she's done is work with a group of young women and girls to advocate with village chiefs to pass community bylaws so that a man who marries a girl under the age of 21 has his land taken away and pays a fee of 7 goats. And, that maybe sounds silly sitting here in the Charles Schwab Center, but it actually is incredibly effective. And since they started this work in 2011, they haven't had a single case of child marriage take place in the region in southern Malawi where they've been doing the work. So again, it's, not something that would ever have occurred to me of like, yep, it must be goats if it's Malawi. But it's, finding those people who know their reality and know their context and are already doing great work and are visionary social entrepreneurs and helping them take that to scale.
I'm interested, Riya, in how you would answer that in relation to the US and traditions and cultural practices here.
Yeah. I mean, again, going back to child marriage, the child marriage bill that was recently passed, Girl Up had a big involvement with, and a lot of American girls had the opportunity to go speak with their representative and talk about this issue. And a lot of the questions that came up were, who do you think you are going into other countries telling people what to do? These practices have been in these countries for so long, and here you are trying to tell us to stop doing that. And one thing that we've all kind of learned through the process of advocating for these girls is that safety comes first. And if these girls are not safe, if their basic human rights are being neglected, then that's not a good thing. And it's something that we need to intervene and kind of try to stop. So I think in the work that I've done with Girl Up, I've experienced it in that respect. But also, girls in America are so much different from girls in developing countries with the way that we act. It's the clothes that we wear. Certain clothes that, me and my friends wear would not be considered appropriate in places like Pakistan. And that's also something that divide that you were talking about is also, I think, has to do with the cultural practices that we have here. And also understanding that they are so different and respecting those other cultures instead of saying, oh, well, we're right. What we're doing is right. What we're doing is what other people should do. Other people should be allowed to dress like that. While that may be true, we also have to respect that other people have these cultural practices that they've done for so long, and we have to respect that.
Great perspective, thank you. Another question via Twitter. How do you, any of you can take this question, how do you feel about the lean-in movement that Sheryl Sandberg has spearheaded?
Sarah?
Don't all jump at once. Do you feel, I suppose the question perhaps in the context of this conversation is, do you think it has any resonance or relevance for girls and the girls' work that you're all doing? Or is it just a different stratosphere of conversation that she has begun?
I think since we are all girls and women, and I think we're all, as a world, of course, we're all technically in the same stratosphere. And that's something that, I know, something that we have to recognize is that girls and women, here's another divide between girls and women. We come from the same place. We go through similar things. And I think the lean-in movement is especially very powerful because it does bring up the question of whether women should be in leadership roles or not. And that's something that needs to be addressed. And by addressing it, the conversation of girls does come into question, and we benefit from that too. So,
great answer.
There's a ripple effect. Fantastic. So as I come towards the close of the program, which has rolled around very quickly, I wanted to ask each of you in turn to address the question, what can all of us in this room this evening do or take away or take action on when we kind of get home tonight, or kind of like even in the room later as talking with some of the organizations that you all represent? What can all of us do to create a more equitable world for girls? Riya.
Okay, I'm going to start with some advice that my mom has always instilled in me and my sisters. Think about how you can empower yourself first, then your family, then your community, and then the world. So kind of like an onion, and start in the middle. So I think number one thing to all the girls out there, be sure to recognize that you can empower yourself through one of the most powerful, and now through technology, one of the easiest ways is through education. So educating yourself on the issues is something that I'm very excited about. And I think just educating yourselves on the issues and recognizing that you do have the power to make change in whatever you're passionate about. So as long as you recognize that passion and understand that you have to learn more about it to really make a change, I think that's the first step and something you can do tonight.
Denise.
Yeah, I think, a critical thing that we, again, can all do tonight is recognize that if we're here, it's because we care about these issues, and we really need to recognize the power that we have to create change. So, we're all advocates, we're all philanthropists. If you give $1 to a cause you care about, you're a philanthropist. If you vote on an issue in your school or your community, or send a letter to your congressperson, you're an advocate. So really recognizing the power that we each have in our own spheres, whether we're girls, whether we're women, whether we're men, to create change, I think is really critical. And I think one of the things that I am excited and really hoping to do more of is looking at how to integrate economic empowerment for girls into more of the global conversation. Because, even with the success we've seen of, having impacted over 4 million girls around the world, nonetheless, girls in most of the countries that we're working in, actually in all of the countries we're working in, are still incredibly poor and still don't have enough to eat often and still don't have enough money to pay their school fees and finish their education. So I think really for everyone here, to educate ourselves even more and think more strategically about what we can do and how we can increase our power to create change is critical.
Thank you. Sarah?
Yeah, I came up with 3 things. I'm not sure they're things to jump into tonight. I tend to be more of a long-term person, and I think change happens quite slowly. So I think in terms of empowerment, I do feel that it's incredibly important to understand what the power structure is and really to look at what it means and how it functions, because I think it's difficult for us to create change or become empowered if we don't actually understand how it works. And that's within our families, within our communities, at national level and international level, and I think that's helpful. And then I think the other thing that's incredibly important is to really be actively seek out and hear what girls are saying from different backgrounds and different communities from yours, and incorporate their perspective into your thinking. I think that's incredibly powerful and important. And finally, be part of a movement that's trying to change something that you believe in, and add your particular talent and energy to it.
Thank you. Well, very inspiring words to close on from all of you. And I want to thank everybody on our panel for your expertise and for your passion for your work, for all that you're achieving for girls in the world. We've been really honoured to share your perspectives this evening. Thank you so much. And I want to encourage everybody to stay and join the conversation. There are things that all of us can do and can begin this evening to take us on the path to the empowerment of girls and women. There are representatives from every organisation here this evening who can talk to you about membership, activism, donating, ways in which you can be a change agent as a girl or as a woman or as a man. I hope we have we have some men in the audience, and I'm thrilled that you're here. So please join us for a glass of wine and for some refreshments, and we'd be thrilled to continue the conversation with all of you, and thank you for coming this evening.